Jesus reveals the secret loneliness that's silently hurting you. Have you ever felt like your soul was screaming in the silence, as if you are surrounded by voices, but none of them hear the true sound of what is happening inside you? There is a pain that many carry and almost no one can see, a secret loneliness disguised as strength, faith, a smile, a loneliness that does not choose a place or time, that is hidden even in worship, in prayers, in relationships. It's that emptiness that arrives without knocking on the door, that accompanies you even when everyone thinks you're fine. And the scariest thing? It's just that you can live with it for years, without realizing how much it is hurting you inside. Few people know this. Few understand. But Jesus reveals to you today something that has been kept hidden for centuries. Something that is at the heart of the scriptures and that perhaps no one has ever told you clearly. It's not weakness. It's not a lack of faith. It is a deep, spiritual wound that many are trying to ignore. But that needs to be exposed so that it can finally be healed. You are not here by chance. If this message has reached you, it is because Jesus is about to touch something that you may not even know how to name, but feel every day. This hidden loneliness has destroyed hearts in silence. But today, the sky breaks the silence. Today, a forgotten truth will be revealed. But be careful. What you're about to hear may shake everything you thought you understood about your pain. Because this revelation is not for everyone, it is for those who dare to face their souls and ask, Lord, why do I still feel this way? So take a deep breath, open your heart, and prepare yourself. Because Jesus reveals something to you that can forever change the way you see your own pain and the path to the peace that your heart has always cried out for in secret. Take a deep breath. Open your heart. You are in a sacred moment. This is not just another video. It is a spiritual summons. Jesus brought you here not by chance, but because there is something very deep that he wants to reveal to your heart today. Something that goes beyond words, and that only the Holy Spirit can explain. Maybe you've heard many messages. Maybe you've tried to find answers in so many places. But there are pains that only Jesus can interpret, solitudes that only he can translate, and liberations that only happen when the soul finally surrenders. Jesus reveals to you today something that can break silent cycles of emotional suffering, something that can bring healing to wounds that no one sees, but that you carry every day. Don't allow anything to take your attention now. Don't minimize what you are feeling, because that word is not common. It is a direct response from heaven to your soul. If this message has already started to touch you, don't ignore this touch. Write a declaration of faith in the comments right now. I refuse to continue living this pain in silence. This is not just a comment, it is a prophetic act, a public alliance with what God is starting in your life today. And if you are feeling that this message is for you, that something different has already started to happen in your spirit, enjoy this video now. Because when you click like, you're telling YouTube, show this word to more people who also need healing. This click is a seed of evangelization. It is your faith becoming a bridge to the liberation of others. Share, sign up, be part of what heaven is building here. You are the answer in someone's life. And what Jesus reveals to you today, it hasn't even started yet. Get ready, because the first story we're going to dive into could be exactly what your heart never knew how to put into words but always felt. And when you hear what happened to Elijah, you will realize that Jesus is speaking directly to you. You are about to delve into stories that, despite being old, carry extremely current pain. These are sacred stories but also deeply human. And the first of them is perhaps the closest to what you feel today. Because sometimes the greatest loneliness is the one that happens even when we are surrounded by people. And if you've ever wondered why you feel this way, even with faith, even within the church, even with everyone around, then you need to listen to what Jesus reveals to you now. Imagine the scene. A man who had just faced kings, defied multitudes, and been used by God in a supernatural way. A prophet who saw fire fall from the sky, who tore down false altars with divine truth. And yet now, he runs. Run to save your own life. His name? Elijah. The same Elijah who was used to confront Jezebel is now hiding in a cave, broken, with his spirit crushed. He sits on the cold floor of solitude, far from everything and everyone. The sound of the desert winds whispers that he is alone, and perhaps most painfully, he believes it. I was left alone, and now they want to take my life, he says. But the sky at this moment does not remain silent. God approaches and asks, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" 1 Kings 19:9. It's not an accusation, it's a revelation. It's the touch of a God who sees even when you hide. A God who is not scandalized by your escape, but who enters the cave to find you. And how many of us are not exactly like Elijah? Have you ever felt this way? Surrounded by people but empty. Inside? Doing everything right, but inside imploding? Being in meetings, services, meetings, but with your soul locked in an emotional cave that no one sees? Maybe you also said the same thing. I was alone. But Jesus reveals to you that the fact that he is isolated does not mean that he has been forgotten. Your loneliness is not a sign of spiritual weakness. Elijah was a man of prayer. Elijah was a channel of miracles, and yet it fell apart. Not because I didn't have faith, but because I was tired. And maybe that's what brought you here today. This exhaustion that no one understands. This internal struggle that you can't explain. This feeling that you're about to fall apart, even when everyone applauds you. And now, pay attention to this, because here comes the twist. Elijah did not leave the cave with screams or thunder. He was not shaken by an earthquake, nor by fire. God revealed himself to him in a gentle whisper, a delicate, almost imperceptible sound, but deep enough to rebuild a soul. Do you understand this? The answer to your pain may not come with noise, but with silence, with presence, with the Holy Spirit entering your loneliness and saying, "You are no longer alone," because Jesus reveals it to you today. The cave may be dark, but God knows exactly where you are. And if you identify with Elijah, if you've ever found yourself saying, "God, I've done it all, and yet I feel empty," then this is for you. God doesn't want you hidden anymore. He wants to restore you. He wants to renew his strength. He wants to remind you that there are still 7,000 who have not bowed down, that there is still purpose, there is still calling, there is still life. Loneliness is not the end of the line. It is the beginning of a new path, if you allow him to enter. Now tell me, is this pain you feel really just emotional? Or is it spiritual, a call back to presence? Comment now. I refuse to continue. Hiding in the cave! Write this down. It's not just any comment. It is a declaration of break with this cycle of silence and isolation. It's your soul saying, "Jesus, I heard your whisper." And if this word is touching you, if something inside your spirit has started to move, enjoy this video now. Not out of vanity, but because that click is like a silent cry of faith, and it could be the instrument that brings that message to someone who is on the verge of collapse. This is evangelization. This is mission. This is healing, because Jesus reveals you, but also sends you now. What comes next goes straight to the hearts of those people who have ever screamed in silence while praying. There is a woman in the Bible who prayed so deeply that no one understood her cry, but God understood. And what he did with her may be exactly what he wants to do with you today. It was there, in that temple in Shiloh, that Hannah spilled everything. There were no more words. There was no more strength. Just the pain, that raw, silent pain that doesn't scream, but tears. She was kneeling, her body hunched over, her eyes burning, and her chest collapsed under the weight of years of mockery, contempt, and frustration. Peninnah, Elkanah's other wife, hurled words like poisoned arrows. "What good is your husband's love if your belly remains as dry as the desert?" And no matter how much Anna tried to ignore it, the shame of not being able to generate life grew like a shadow that surrounded her every day. And then, in that voiceless prayer, everything was said. The lips moved, but no sound came out. Those looking from the outside, like the priest Eli, thought she was drunk. Because the world does not know how to recognize what spiritual pain is. The world doesn't know how to distinguish a crushed, heart from an unbalanced soul. The world does not understand when loneliness sets in within faith. But God saw, God heard. God interpreted each tear as a sacred verse that ascended to the heavens. And maybe now, as you listen to this, you are experiencing the same loneliness as Anna. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the cruelest one. The one in which you speak and no one listens, in which you vent and no one understands, in which your pain is read as drama, exaggeration, or weakness. You've been begging for answers, seeking comfort in someone's eyes, and all you find is judgment or indifference. Have you ever felt as if your pain was invisible even to those closest to you? This is where the power of 1 Samuel 1:13 comes in, because when the voice fails, God interprets the gestures. When the word is missing, He translates the sigh. When faith seems insufficient, He listens even to silence. And this is the revelation that Jesus brings you today. You are not alone, not even in mute prayer. He hears what not even you can put into words. But the truth that no one wants to admit is this. Maybe you are surrounded by people, in a church, in a group of friends, in a full house, and yet you carry a pain that no one notices. This is not because you are weak. This is because the human soul has abysses that only Jesus can fathom, and He reveals it to you today. This pain that no one understands is the space that He wants to fill. Now think with me. How many times have you felt guilty for still suffering? How many times have you heard phrases like, "You have to have more faith. Just pray and it will pass. This is a lack of God." But what if I told you that the fact that you remain firm, even with your heart in pieces, is already a faith that touches the sky? Is loneliness in pain really a sign of spiritual weakness? Or is it exactly there that God finds space to reveal Himself like never before? The spiritual world sees what the physical world ignores. Eli looked at Anna and saw an imbalance. God looked at Hannah and saw intercession. And you, who perhaps have been misunderstood, judged, forgotten, need to know. Jesus reveals to you that there is depth in your pain. And this depth is the space where revelation is born. The solitude of the soul is the exact point where He comes down to touch you. So today, if you feel that no one understands you, that no one listens to your silent pleas, I challenge you. Comment now, with faith, with boldness, with pain, if applicable, the phrase that changes destinies. Jesus, listen to what I don't even know how to say. Be the voice of those who cry in silence. Be the prayer of those who no longer know how to pray. And if anyone says this is weakness, share this video. Because sometimes what seems like weakness to the world is exactly what moves heaven. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this message. Because there is something powerful about recognizing the silence of the soul as a place of divine visitation. The Temple of Shiloh became the birthplace of the answer because one woman dared to be vulnerable before God. And perhaps what is about to be born in your life will come out of that voiceless prayer, that hidden tear, that loneliness that no one else understands. But what happens in the next story will shock you, because there is a woman who was thrown into the desert to die, and it was precisely there, where no one else saw value, that God revealed one of the most intimate names of His essence. When the last drop of water dried up, she believed she would die alone. Hagar, the rejected Egyptian servant, abandoned in the desert by a pain she didn't ask to carry, used, discarded, ignored. Her story begins inside someone's home, but ends, or so it seemed, under the scorching sun of a desert that offered no shade, no water, no solace. Do you know what hurts the most? It wasn't abandonment. It was the fact that, until that moment, no one had even asked her how she felt. There was no room for a servant to cry. There was no place for her pain to be named. And maybe now you understand exactly what she felt. Because it's not just physical deserts that kill us. There are emotional, silent deserts where you walk every day surrounded by people, but invisible. Where you smile to maintain appearance, but inside you scream. Where you post, interact, live, but don't feel. And worse, no one seems to notice. You may even exist for others, but you are not really seen. It's as if your pain doesn't have enough weight to deserve care. Have you ever felt this way? Like someone who is there, but erased? The loneliness that Hagar experienced is the same that many today face behind the scenes in life. She was sent away by Sarah, the same one who one day forced her to have a child, and when she was no longer useful, she was expelled. She carried, in her belly, the promise of another, but in her soul, the emptiness of never having been chosen for herself. Hagar wept in the silence of exile. But then something unexpected happened. The text says that the angel of the Lord found her at a spring of water in the desert. Do you understand the weight of this sentence? It wasn't Hagar who found God. It was God who found her. Because Jesus reveals you. Even when no one else sees you, he sees you deeply. He knows where your pain is. He goes to his point of abandonment. This is why Genesis 16:13 is so powerful. Hagar gives God a name that no one had dared to give before. You are the God who sees me. The first time this title is stated in the Bible does not come from a prophet, nor a king, nor a patriarch. It comes from a rejected woman, an immigrant, a slave, pregnant, abandoned, someone who in the logic of the world was insignificant. But to God, she was seen. Jesus reveals to you today that the pain that the world ignores is exactly what attracts divine attention. And here's a deep confrontation for your heart. How many times have you doubted your spiritual importance because the people around you didn't recognize your pain? How many times have you been silent because you thought that what you feel is not big enough to bring to God? How many times have you thought you had to look good to be noticed? But what if I told you that what you were taught about recognition is completely wrong? What if heaven is closer to the forgotten than to the applauded? Jesus reveals to you that his presence does not depend on the stage, but on the depth. And it is in the middle of your desert, far from applause, far from validation from others, far from social media, that he appears to remind you, I see you, not how the world sees you, but as only the Creator can see. He sees the tears you wipe away before going to sleep. He sees the frustration you hide behind an automatic routine. He sees the dreams you shelved because no one believed in them. He sees. So I ask you, sincerely and boldly, are you really invisible? Or have you learned to doubt your worth because you expected approval from those who don't have spiritual eyes? Is this feeling of abandonment really a lack of faith? Or is it proof that God wants to meet you out of the spotlight? Now, if this message spoke to you, if this desert of invisibility is where you have been walking, declare this with courage in the comments. Say, Jesus, I know you see me. Declare with faith, even if your soul still doubts, because sometimes declaring is the first step to breaking out of silence. And more, share this video with someone who lives feeling left out, because perhaps today, your attitude will be that of the angel who meets another Hagar halfway. And if you still feel like you no longer have the strength to continue, if you feel like the pain has been going on for too long, take a deep breath, close your eyes. Imagine Jesus meeting you right where you are right now and telling you, I see you, with love, with compassion, with intention, but something even more powerful is about to be revealed. Because there is a moment in the Bible when a great leader, strong in the eyes of everyone, was consumed by such profound loneliness that he almost gave up. And it was in this silent exhaustion that God revealed one of the most urgent truths for those who carry everything alone. What comes next may transform the way you see the weight you carry. There are burdens that cannot be seen by the eye, but destroy inside with the weight of 1,000 stones. Moses knew what this was. He who freed an entire people with the staff in his hands now found himself sunk into a tiredness that the body could not explain. But the soul screamed. From sunrise to sunset, the people lined up to pour out their problems, anxieties, disputes, laments, and complaints on him. Day after day, in the middle of the desert, under the weight of responsibility, Moses supported a nation and forgot about himself. Nobody saw that. No one asked if he slept, if he cried, if he doubted, because everyone expected him to be strong, always ready. But what happens when even the strongest breaks? When the soul screams for help, but no one notices? This is the loneliness that destroys in silence. The isolation of those who carry the world on their shoulders because everyone thinks you can do it, even when you no longer can. And here's the detail that no one tells you. The pain of the strong is ignored because his image is comfort to others. And maybe today you see yourself in that place. You are what everyone looks for, what everyone trusts, what everyone turns to. But who listens to you when you want to disappear? Who holds you when your faith shakes? Who sees you as human? That's when Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came up with one of the most powerful phrases in the Bible. What you're doing is not good. You're taking on too much on your own. This wasn't a harsh correction. It was a helping hand, a revelation, a warning, a divine intervention camouflaged as a family counsel. Because Jesus reveals to you, the burden you carry alone is not a sign of faith. It is a symptom of emotional exhaustion. And he didn't call you to exhaust yourself, trying to be God to others. He called you to walk with balance, with wisdom, with help. Now look deep inside yourself and answer honestly. How many times have you said, "It's okay, just to not bother"? How many times have you choked back your tears because someone needed your smile? How many times have you thought about giving up but kept going because everyone depends on you? But what if I told you that this idea that you need to endure everything didn't come from God, but from a culture that idolizes performance and despises rest? That's why Jesus reveals this truth to you. Being strong doesn't mean enduring everything. Being strong means knowing when to ask for help. Moses only found relief when he recognized that he needed to share the burden. And you know what's more beautiful? It was God who raised up Jethro to see this. In other words, when you no longer see a way out, God sends people, advice, solutions. But first you need to admit, you can't do it alone anymore. Moses' loneliness was not due to the absence of people. It was due to excessive expectations. And this is perhaps the worst form of loneliness, when you are surrounded but overwhelmed, suffocated, pressured to never fail. Have you ever felt this way? The pain of carrying everything alone is so cruel that even prayer becomes effort. Even the presence of God seems distant because the body is too tired to feel it. But here's a revelation. Jesus never asked you for perfection. He offered you grace. And grace begins when you let go of the weight and accept being cared for. Now, I want to challenge you with a question that may hurt, but can heal. Are you exhausting yourself in the name of a strength that God never demanded of you? Is this struggle to keep everything under control faith? Or is it fear of appearing weak? Because there is a secret that almost no one preaches. There is more anointing in sincere rest than in empty effort. God uses the broken. God lifts the tired. God renews the exhausted. But to do that, you need to stop pretending that everything is under control. If this word touched on something you've been hiding, chronic tiredness, emotional exhaustion, loneliness masquerading as productivity, write in the comments with courage. Jesus, I don't want to carry everything alone anymore. Declare it, not for me, but for you. Because this confession is the beginning of a deep healing. Share this video with someone who is always smiling but inside is sinking. Because sometimes salvation comes through a video that someone decided to share out of spiritual sensitivity. And if you still feel like there is no solution, breathe. Close your eyes and imagine Jesus saying tenderly, I see your tiredness, and I'm here. You don't have to go it alone. You weren't made for this, and there is a comfort coming to you that no one can explain, only living. But that's not all. Because what comes next will destabilize religious certainties that many have carried for years. There is a story in which Jesus arrived too late, and yet he reversed the impossible, because his time is not ours. And maybe, just maybe, your miracle is being delayed, to be even more impactful. Get ready. What comes may shake your way of seeing God's delay. When Lazarus fell ill, the house was silently tense. It was not a common illness, one that passes with time or that can be treated with herbs and rest. It was a pain that spread through Marta's, eyes through Maria's restrained breathing and through the hope that flowed through the fingers of the two sisters. The despair was immediate. They sent messengers to Jesus urgently. The one you love is sick. They did not ask for healing. They just remembered love, as if to say, Lord, just the fact of being loved by you should be enough to attract your help. But the days passed, and Jesus didn't come. He didn't respond. He didn't rush. It didn't arrive. And Lazarus died. The pain of waiting turned into mourning, and faith, which seemed firm, now wavered like a weak sail before the wind of divine absence. Martha, when she finally saw Jesus approaching, could not bear it. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It wasn't an accusation. It was a cry of the soul, because the loneliness of those who wait and see. No answer is one of the cruelest. It's the emptiness of praying, trusting, believing, and seeing everything break anyway. Maybe you've already lived this moment. You prayed for something with all your faith. You waited. You declared verses. You cried in your room. You fasted. You held on tight. But the miracle didn't come. The door didn't open. The answer did not arrive. And now, what remains is this feeling of spiritual abandonment, this anguish of asking yourself, did Jesus listen? Does he care? Was my cry not enough? But Jesus now reveals to you a truth that changes everything. The fact that he did not arrive at his time does not mean that he stopped coming. God's time is so different from ours that often his silence seems like indifference, when in fact it is a construction. Waiting is a sacred field where faith dies or matures. And when Jesus finally arrives in Bethany, it is not just to console, it is to be resurrected, to transform, to reverse what was already considered dead. And perhaps that is exactly what he is preparing for you, something that will not just be healing but resurrection. It won't just be an answer, it will be a revelation. Jesus reveals to you the delay that seemed like abandonment is, in fact, the setting for something bigger than you imagined. Because if Lazarus was cured of his illness, it would be an ordinary miracle. But resurrecting him 4 days after death, this changes everything. That marks it. This transforms crowds. Maybe you think you wasted time waiting, but what if this wait is precisely the time that heaven needed to prepare something that goes beyond your original prayer? And here's a courageous confrontation. Wasn't what you called delay actually proof that Jesus trusted your faith even in silence? Wasn't waiting the greatest honor heaven gave you? Because he knew that even through tears and graves, you would still say, Lord, if you were here. That's faith. This is love that persists even in the dark. But you have to be honest with your soul. How many times have you felt angry with God? How many times have you thought about stopping praying because it's no use? How many times have you seen others receiving miracles while your request was still rotting in the tomb of promise? If this is your reality, take a deep breath and listen. Jesus is not late. He arrives at the time when his glory is manifested in an undeniable way. And when he arrives, nothing remains dead. Neither does faith, not even dream, nor hope. If this word spoke to you, if you feel like you are living in the time of Bethany, where everything seems to have died while you waited for help, comment now with faith and truth. Jesus, even though it is late, I believe in your arrival. Write this down. Share this video with someone who has also been waiting a long time, because this wait could be the beginning of something supernatural. Sometimes the miracle begins when the world has already given up. And now, if this message touched your heart, click I liked as an act of faith. Because yes, even a click can be used by God as a sign of covenant. Your like can be an instrument of transformation for others who, like you, are tired of waiting and on the verge of giving up. It's not just a button. It is a seed of hope. But wait, because what comes next will confront you even more. There is a story in the Bible in which a man, even surrounded by friends, was completely misunderstood. They judged him, accused him, hurt him, when all he wanted was to be heard. And Jesus reveals to you that there is a place within pain where only he enters. And what he does there, no one else can do. Get ready. What comes may forever change the way you interpret the judgments that surround you. There are pains that hurt more when they are silent than when they are shouted. Job knew this pain, and it wasn't just the loss of children, property, or health. Not only was his body covered in wounds, nor was his soul in tatters. What hurt most was being misunderstood in the midst of pain, being accused by those who should embrace, being judged at the moment when he needed to be heard most. Job's friends arrived to comfort him, but sat back to accuse him. And when he most needed a shoulder, he found pointing fingers. When he most called for empathy, he received cold theology. When he sought relief, he found a court. This is the loneliness that destroys you from within, being surrounded by voices and still not being heard. Because what hurts is not just the loss. It is the silence of someone who claims to love. It's indifference disguised as advice. It's being forced to hear phrases like, "You must have done something wrong." This is God dealing with you. You have to accept that God wanted it this way, as if pain needed explanation, not compassion. And maybe that's exactly the pain you've been experiencing. Screaming inside and receiving judgment. Cry and be told to pray more. Suffer, and still have to defend yourself. Job looked up to heaven and cried out, not against God, but in search of him. And in the middle of chapter 19, he makes one of the most harrowing statements in the Bible. All my intimate friends abhor me. In other words, what is closest to me rejects me. What I trusted in now turns against me. Job's loneliness was not emptiness. There were too many wrong people around, and this perhaps is the most invisible pain of the century, having to bear opinions while your soul begs for silence and understanding. Jesus reveals something to you that you may never have realized. He is the only one who listens even when no one understands what you say. He is the only one who does not interpret your pain as rebellion or sin. He even listens to what you don't have the courage to put into words. And more, he will never reduce you to your crisis. Job's friends reduced him to losses. God saw him beyond the pain, and that's what he does with you today. But what if I told you that the greatest loneliness is not being alone, but not being understood by those who walk beside you? Have you ever stopped to think about how many times you had to shut up to avoid being misunderstood? How many times have you preferred silence, not because of a lack of faith, but because of tiredness of being judged? What if this supposed spiritual apathy that so many point out to you is, in fact, the most real expression of your deepest pain? Job reached his limit, and ultimately, he was honest. He stopped trying to please the religious. He stopped trying to explain himself. And there, in vulnerability, God began to speak. Because Jesus reveals to you that there is a type of pain that silences the world, but awakens heaven. That cry that no one responds to here is exactly what attracts the divine manifestation. God doesn't need you to justify your pain. He just wants you not to hide it. Now I ask you with courage and love, do you really believe that God left you because you can't pray like you used to? Do you really believe that Jesus turned away because your faith is wavering? Or is he closer, now than ever, precisely because you no longer have the strength to pretend? If this message speaks directly to your heart, if you identify with Job, if you feel that no one else understands the pain you carry, write in the comments with sincerity, "Jesus, hear what no one else hears." This phrase is not an ordinary outburst. It is a spiritual surrender. What's more, share this video with someone who has already been accused when they just needed a hug. Because sometimes, all a soul needs is to hear, "I know, I see, I understand." You take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this message. Close your eyes and imagine Jesus sitting next to you, not talking, not judging, just listening. Because there are moments when the silence of Jesus heals more than the speech of men. But there is an even deeper story, more human and more spiritual. A pain felt even by King David, the one who was after God's own heart. He, who led crowds and wrote psalms, also cried out from the depths of a solitude that seemed endless. And what he declared could be exactly what your soul is trying to scream right now. What comes next will shake the view many have of unshakable faith. Get ready, because even the anointed also felt abandoned. It's scary when even God's presence seems to have disappeared. When you pray and feel like you're talking to the walls, When the verses no longer comfort, the praises sound empty, and the silence in heaven is deafening. That's exactly how David felt. The man after God's own heart, the warrior who defeated giants, the anointed king at a young age, the one who wrote worship songs with the same intensity that shed his tears on his pillow. He who had so often been the voice of hope for an entire nation was now just a cry torn in the darkness. My God, why have you forsaken me?" This phrase, which would later be echoed by Jesus himself on the cross, was not the result of incredulity. It was the fruit of humanity. David didn't stop believing. He just dared to be honest. And perhaps, right now, you are experiencing this type of silence. One that is not just the absence of sound, but the absence of signals. The one that makes you question whether you are still at the center of God's will, or whether you were forgotten along the way. There is a pain that is not the pain of loss, nor of the loneliness of men. It is the pain of feeling that God himself has been absent. And this pain, when not understood, turns into guilt. Have I sinned too much? Has he left me? Am I too far away? But Jesus now reveals something that completely changes this perspective. The perceived absence is not a real absence. God's silence is never contempt. It is proof. It's intimacy on another level. It is him working in depths that your senses have not yet reached. David, even though he felt helpless, never stopped talking to God. This is faith. Faith is not the absence of pain. It is persistence in dialogue. And that's what sustains you when everything seems to be falling apart. Psalm 22 begins with a cry of abandonment, but ends in praise. Because David's faith was not based on the answer he wanted, but on the certainty of who God was, even when everything seemed to say otherwise. And here is the spiritual shock you may have never considered. Jesus himself, in his most acute moment of suffering, repeats these exact words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The Son of the living God, hanging on a cross, felt the same emptiness you feel now. This is not blasphemy, it is redemption. Jesus not only understands your suffering, he went through it, and in doing so, he consecrated the space of pain as a territory of divine visitation. He didn't just die to save you, he felt everything so he could provide for you. So I need to ask you a difficult but necessary question. Is what you are calling abandonment of God actually an invitation to the deepest level of communion? Is absence his way of teaching you to trust even without visible guarantees? Is this pain the land where your next praise will be born? If this word has crossed you, if you are in that place where the sky seems mute and your heart is tired of waiting for signs, declare in the comments, not with religiosity, but with truth. Jesus, even without feeling it, I continue to believe. This is not just a sentence, it is a spiritual battle won, because continuing to believe in the dark is the purest worship there is. Share this video with someone who has ever prayed feeling like God wasn't listening, because that word could be the echo that his heart is desperate to hear. And now, if this message spoke to you deeply, click I liked as a prophetic act. Yes, a simple gesture can be an altar. A click can be a confession of faith, a small step that activates big movements in the invisible. Jesus reveals to you, even the lightest touch can generate a spiritual earthquake. Like this video, if you choose to believe even without feeling it. There is a scene in the scriptures in which the Son of God himself kneels and finds no support either in his friends or in the heavens. The emotional pain he faced was so intense, so human, that he sweated drops of blood. And if even Jesus had a moment of paralyzing anguish, who are we to think that faith means the absence of pain? What comes next may transform your view of weakness, because there is a sacred force that is born in the place where no one else enters, only God. If even Jesus cried in the silence of Gethsemane, why do you still believe that what you feel is a sign of spiritual weakness? The scene is one of the most moving in Scripture. The Son of God, the one who healed multitudes, who confronted demons with a word, who multiplied bread and raised the dead, is now on his knees, alone, abandoned by friends who fall asleep and by disciples who do not understand the depth of the anguish he carries. He's not screaming, but the weight of the moment is deafening. My soul is deeply saddened, even to death. These are words that were not spoken to an enemy, nor written. In a psalm, they were confided to Peter, James, and John, to those closest to them, and yet they were not understood. There are pains that no one understands. There are anxieties that suffocate even those who are surrounded by love. There are nights so dense that not even the most faithful realize that you are about to fall apart inside. The anxiety Jesus faced in Gethsemane was not the result of doubt. It was a reflection of humanity. It was the weight of an inevitable fate and a pain that no one could share. And maybe that's where you find yourself now, knowing what you need to face but desperately wishing there was another way. But Jesus reveals something to you in this scene that many ignore. He asked, he prayed, he begged the Father that, if possible, the cup be removed. This was not cowardice. It was courage to be vulnerable. And maybe that's what you need today. To stop pretending that everything is fine and to truly say, Lord, I can't take this anymore. Because faith is not pretending that it doesn't hurt. Faith is remaining even when it hurts. And here is the transformative revelation. Jesus overcame Gethsemane not when the pain went away, but when he chose to continue, even shaking, even sweating blood, even alone, even though he knew that Peter would deny him, that Judas would betray him, and that everyone would abandon him. He remained. And that's exactly what he wants to teach you, that you don't need to wait for anxiety to go away to move on, that you don't need to wait for perfect peace to take the next step. Because courage in the kingdom is not the absence of fear. It is walking with Jesus even when fear still walks alongside. Now, in all sincerity, look at yourself and answer. Is what you have called an emotional crisis not, in fact, a spiritual field where God is forging your resistance, your maturity, your most raw and honest faith? Could it be that this internal battle, which you thought was a sign of defeat, is exactly the environment where God is building your victory? If this word is confronting you, if you feel that your soul is sad to death, if you have ever thought about giving up even though you love God, write in the comments, as an act of truth and surrender, Jesus, I am also in Gethsemane, but I choose to continue. And don't write this on impulse. Write with your soul, because this phrase can be the bridge between collapse and a new beginning. Now, share this video with someone who always seems strong, but who you realize is struggling in silence. Because sometimes, the greatest miracle someone needs isn't immediate healing. It's knowing that even Jesus cried, and he won. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Imagine the garden. Feel the weight on your shoulders, the sweat that turns into blood. And listen, not my will, but yours, be done. Because there is a peace that can only be found after surrender, and there is a strength that only arises from the depths of anguish. You are not alone. Jesus has been there before, and he left a path marked with tears to remind you that even pain can have purpose. But that's still not all. There is a history of betrayal so deep that it seems impossible to forgive. A pain that arises within one's own home, among those who claim to love. And the biblical character who experienced this was not just betrayed, he was sold, silenced, thrown into a dark hole, and forgotten. What he experienced reveals a type of loneliness that few have the courage to admit, that of not being understood even by those who should protect you. And what God did out of that pain may redefine your view of rejection. What comes now will surprise you. There is a pain that hurts more than the betrayal of an enemy. It is being rejected by those who should protect you. It's when the words that hurt you the most don't come from strangers, but from the mouth of those who shared the table with you. This is what Jesus reveals to you now. Imagine the scene. A young man with a dreamy heart, Joseph, Jacob's beloved son, approaches his brothers in the field. He doesn't want to fight. He wants to share a dream, but the eyes that receive him do not shine with pride. They burn with hatred. The phrase that echoes is a knife disguised as mockery. Here comes the dreamer. They don't listen to him. They don't welcome him. They throw him into a well, and this well, dark, cold, without an echo, without a visible exit, becomes a portrait of a pain that many hide today, that of not being understood even by their own brothers. How many times Have you tried to explain yourself and been misunderstood? How many times have you loved sincerely and been accused of pride, of exaggeration, of wanting to appear? How many times have you shared your dream with the hope of finding support, only to be met with irony, contempt, envy? Joseph was not sold by enemies. It was sold by the brothers themselves, and that changes everything, because what hurts the most is not being attacked by those who hate you. It's being discarded by those who should defend you. But there's something that few people realize about this story, and it's exactly this that can completely change the way you view his rejection. Joseph didn't lose his value at the well. God did not cancel his purpose when Joseph was thrown into the cistern. On the contrary, it was in that moment of abandonment that the divine plan began to manifest. Not when everything made sense, but precisely when everything seemed to be ruin. Jesus reveals to you now, not all rejection is a curse. Sometimes it's redirection. Sometimes the pain of not being understood by your loved ones is the path that pushes you towards what is truly yours. Jose only arrived at the palace because he passed through the well. He only freed multitudes because he was first chained. And that invites you to a new kind of faith, a faith that does not require human acceptance to believe in God's approval, a faith that looks at contempt and says, I know who called me. But there is an even deeper detail here. Joseph's brothers betrayed him by not supporting his dreams. But what they didn't know, and maybe you don't know yet, is that Joseph's dream wasn't about him. It was about the famine to come. It was about preserving lives. It was about salvation. It was about the future. It was about them too. They tried to kill whoever God raised up to save them. And maybe this is happening to you. People around you don't understand your sensitivity, your depth, your intensity, but it's because they haven't yet seen that your pain is not ego. It's ministry. It is a provision that has not yet arrived. And now, stop. Look inside. What have you done with this pain of not being understood? Are you silent? Did you withdraw? Have you started to doubt the value of your dreams? Because today, Jesus reveals to you that the pain of abandonment does not nullify the promise. May the silence of yours not invalidate the voice of God. And that even if they sell you, even if they throw you into oblivion, heaven is still writing a story about you. A story that will be read by many. But it was only possible because you didn't give up at the well. Therefore, if this message confronts you, if you feel that you are living a Joseph moment, misunderstood, rejected, silenced, write now in the comments, you may not understand me, but God knows me. Write with faith, write with tears, because this is your declaration that you will not die in this pit. It is the scream that breaks the cycle of silence. It is the spiritual response to what hell wanted to use as trauma. And if you know someone who has suffered in silence because they were not understood, share this video. Be the voice that person needs to hear, because maybe her dream is still alive, just waiting for someone to say, I believe in you. Imagine Jose's look inside the well. Imagine the sky looking down and saying, it's not over yet, because it's not over. There are still chapters, and the most unexpected is yet to come. Because even after so much suffering, even after years trapped in invisible chains of pain and injustice, Joseph finds his brothers again. And what he does in this reunion is unusual. That's what we'll talk about in the next block. But prepare your heart, because what God will do with your pain may surprise even those who hurt you. Sometimes what hurts the most isn't God's no. It's silence, the lack of response, the empty echo after a desperate prayer. And it is in this silence that a pain that is almost impossible to explain is born, a spiritual loneliness that makes you ask, am I talking to myself? The Canaanite woman knew exactly how that hurt. She was a mother, and like every mother, she would do anything to save her son. His cry was not for her. It was for someone she loved more than herself. And yet, when she approached Jesus, asking for help, there was no response. The text is clear, but he did not answer him a word. Silence. Cold. Incomprehensible. Now imagine the scene. She was not Jewish. She was a foreign woman, viewed with prejudice by the religious people of the time. I was already hurt by social rejections. But still, it was. She ran to Jesus, crossed cultural boundaries, faced condemnatory looks, and was ignored. That breaks anyone. Because what is expected from God is compassion, but what she received was emptiness. And the silence of heaven hurts more than the noise of hell. And you? Have you ever prayed with faith and not seen an answer? Have you ever knelt down, hoping for relief and received silence? Have you reached the point of asking, "Does God hear me?" But Jesus reveals something to you now. God's silence is not always contempt. Sometimes it's a test. Sometimes it is an invitation to perseverance that transforms. Because that woman didn't leave. She didn't shut up. She insisted. She cried out, "Lord, help me." Even when she was called a dog, she had enough faith to believe that even the crumbs from God's table would be enough for a miracle. And that's when Jesus turned, looked at her, and said something he'd never said to almost anyone else. "Woman, great is your faith." The prayer that seemed ignored turned into the most touching and public miracle. And this teaches us a truth that perhaps you never dared to believe. God's silence is not the end of the conversation. It is the beginning of a deeper revelation. But what if I told you that the biggest mistake many people make is giving up precisely at this point? Abandon the altar just as God was about to respond? Because it is not the absence of sound that defines the absence of God. It is the absence of faith that closes the door. That woman's faith made Jesus interrupt the original plan. He said that he had come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But her faith opened a path where there was no way. And this is what Jesus reveals to you now. Faith is not just believing when there are promises. It's trusting when there is silence. It's continuing on your knees when the answer doesn't arrive. It's not leaving the presence just because he hasn't spoken yet. Are you willing to do this? Continuing even in silence? Insisting even when everything seems ignored? So write in the comments now. I cry out even in silence. Write with spiritual authority. Because this isn't just a comment. It's a written prayer, an act of public faith. And if you know someone who is about to give up on prayer because of silence, send them this video. Be the voice that this person's faith needs to hear. And here comes a hard and necessary truth. Maybe God's silence is not because he doesn't want to speak, but because he wants to teach you to listen in a different way. Because sometimes God is speaking about no, about delay, about lack of response, and only those who remain can hear. Only those who don't leave receive a yes. But wait, that's not all. There is a story hidden between the lines of this narrative, a secret that few realize. Jesus, by remaining silent, was revealing to the crowd what he admired most, persevering faith. He didn't ignore it out of contempt. He was silent to highlight. Her faith became a showcase for everyone around. And now, thousands of years later, this woman's faith still preaches to the world. And what does that mean about you? That perhaps your pain today is serving a greater purpose than you realize. That perhaps your current silence is a preparation for a public response from God. And that the prayer that seems ignored will, in fact, be the stage for your miracle. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel this truth. Imagine Jesus looking you in the eye and saying, "I heard everything, every word, every tear, every scream. And no, you are not alone. Silence is not his absence. It is his approach. It is the stage that precedes the supernatural. But this is not yet the peak. What's to come in the next block is even more perplexing, because there are moments when God not only responds, he approaches in the flesh, sits next to you, and transforms pain into presence. What you see next could completely change the way you deal with emotional absence. Get ready, because now let's talk about the pain of being with everyone but feeling emotionally absent, and how that could be sabotaging your intimacy with Jesus without you even realizing it. Sometimes the body is there, but the heart is not. The look even finds other eyes, but the soul is miles away. There is a pain that almost no one recognizes, that of being in the middle of everything, present at appointments, at dinner tables, in services, in meetings, but emotionally disconnected, absent from you. It's as if your presence were just an appearance, an empty mold. Like Martha, You are in the right place, but with the wrong focus. It's in the house, but not on your lap. It's serving, but not feeling. And this is more common than you might think. The Bible presents this story to us with an intensity that hurts. Two sisters, two styles of presence, a choice that Jesus highlights as the best part. Jesus arrived at the house of Martha and Mary, and there, in that apparently common scenario, something happens that reveals the secret of emotional loneliness. Martha was busy, involved, active. He did everything right in human eyes. He cleaned, prepared, organized. But Mary did what seemed insignificant. She simply sat at Jesus' feet. While Martha drowned in the commotion, Maria immersed herself in connection. And it is in this contrast that Jesus reveals something that few realize. Excess movement is not always productivity. Often it's an escape. Run away from the pain, the emptiness, the anguish that screams when we are silent. Martha's pain is the same as that of so many today. Doing everything and still feeling alone. Being surrounded by people and still carrying a loneliness that no one sees because your effort masks the absence of your heart. And then Jesus interrupts what appears to be just a domestic scene and says something that resonates to this day. Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, but only one is necessary. Mary chose the best part, and that will not be taken away from her. Jesus did not despise what Martha did, but he exposed what Martha could not see. That presence is not measured by actions, but by surrender, and that there is a presence that heals, and another that just tires. Jesus reveals it to you now. It is not enough to be where Jesus is. You need to be with him, in spirit, in soul, truly. And this confronts many who think that just doing it matters. How many times have you seen yourself in this place? Handling everything, being strong for everyone, but feeling emotionally distant even from God? How many times have you cried while washing dishes, smiling at work, helping at church, because all of this became a cover for a pain that no one notices? Martha represents spiritual activism that suffocates intimacy. Mary, on the other hand, represents the spirit that surrenders, that stops everything to just feel, listen, surrender. This story is a call to the heart. It is a soft cry from the spirit, saying, stop, sit down, breathe. Jesus is in the house, but if you don't choose the best part, you'll continue serving with your hands and shouting with your heart. The time has come to reverse priorities. Understanding that your value is not in how much you do, but in how much you give yourself. That what cures your loneliness is not your productivity. It is the living presence of Jesus filling what your routine cannot reach. Therefore, I challenge you now to do something different. Comment here. I choose the best part. Declare this as a break from this cycle of empty presence. Use this comment as a prophetic act. You are saying to heaven in your soul, no more running around on the outside and dying on the inside. And if this message touched you deeply, enjoy this video as an act of faith. Yes, because your click can reach another Martha out there. Someone drowning in tasks, screaming in silence, dying emotionally. Your light can be God's instrument to restore tired hearts. Share. If this word found you, don't keep it to yourself, but take a deep breath now and listen to what comes next. Because the pain of appearing present while absent is just a layer of the loneliness that destroys you from within. There is an even quieter kind of pain, that of carrying an appearance of strength while falling apart inside. A smiling mask that hides deep wounds, and what you will see in the next block could be the beginning of your most radical emotional healing, because only those who expose the wound can receive the healing touch. And what happens to a powerful man who had everything on the outside but was destroyed on the inside will impact you like never before. It looks like strength, but it's desperation. It looks like control, but it's fear. Naaman was a respected, honored, powerful man, a commander admired by all. He had victories, fame, prestige, but when the armor fell, he bled in silence. Beneath the impeccable uniform, there was a hidden leprosy, a living wound, a silent pain. Naaman is the portrait of so many who today live imprisoned by the image, screaming inside and smiling on the outside. He walked among the powerful, But inside him, there was a wounded boy, and Jesus reveals it to you now. There are people dressed in strength who are about to break from pretending so much. The cruelest loneliness is the one that lives inside those who everyone thinks are fine. Naaman's leprosy was more than a skin disease. It was a metaphor for what many hide beneath their appearance. It was the truth he couldn't show. And how many today live exactly like this? They lead, care, advise, support, but hide. They cannot expose their pain because they would be judged, rejected, diminished. Naaman may have asked himself, how can I, as I am, confess that I am dying inside? But it was only when he took off the armor, emotional, spiritual, social, that healing could begin. And here's a truth that will shake you. God doesn't heal the image you pretend to uphold. He heals the truth you reveal. Naaman went to the prophet Elisha expecting something great, something worthy of your position. But the miracle came with a shock of humility. Elisha didn't even come out to receive him. He just sent a message. Go and wash 7 times in the Jordan and your flesh will be restored. Naaman rebelled, because pride always reacts to the simplicity of God. But behind the simple order, there was a divine secret. One had to immerse not just the body, but the ego. Naaman's pain was not just physical. It was emotional. It was the weight of being. Too strong for too long. Of hiding for so long that he no longer knew who he was without that armor. How many of us are living like Naaman? We take care of everything but ourselves. We defend others, but we abandon ourselves. And the stronger we try to appear, the more alone we become. Because no one welcomes those who don't allow themselves to bleed. But Jesus reveals to you, healing only comes to those who have the courage to undress themselves before God. Naaman had to take everything away. Go to Jordan, dive 7 times. 7, number of perfection, of totality. This means that healing requires a process, requires total delivery. You need to dive into your disappointments, your hurts, your traumas, your secret sins, your muffled screams, and not just once, but until your soul knows God is there in the Jordan of your shame, ready to turn leprosy into testimony. Now listen carefully. Naaman came back different, not just healed physically, but transformed inside. He recognized that there is only one true God. He became humble, he was reborn, and that is the call for you today. Maybe you are the pillar of the home, the company, the church. Maybe everyone leans on you, but you're already at your limit, and you know. There is a hidden leprosy, something that consumes you, and you pretend it doesn't exist. But today, Jesus confronts you with love. Are you willing to take off your armor? Comment now if you dare. I drop my armor. Write this as a break with the image, like an act of surrender. Because Naaman's healing only began when he stopped looking strong, and yours can start today too. If this word spoke to you, share it with someone who also lives hiding wounds behind a smile. And yes, click like, not as an ordinary gesture, but as an act of faith. Your like can be a healing balm for someone who finds themselves alone in this pain. What? If I told you that there is a type of faith that drags on, a faith that seems insufficient, and yet moves the sky? What if you knew that even the most confusing despair can be heard by God? What follows will confront your understanding of faith, because there is a faith that does not scream conviction, but calls for help. And that's when Jesus responds in an even more surprising way. It's strange to think that faith can also hurt, that believing is not always accompanied by certainties, but by tremors. And there are times when even faith seems too small in the face of pain. But Jesus reveals to you, even wavering faith has value when it is sincere. And that is what opens the possessed boy's father's heart wide open. He was not a theological Pharisee. He was not a disciple with rehearsed answers. He was just a desperate father, a man tired of watching his own son being destroyed from the inside, thrown into the fire, foaming, screaming, hurting himself. And no one, absolutely no one, could help him. Even the disciples had failed. Have you ever thought about the loneliness of not having anyone else to turn to? In the pain of shouting help and hearing silence in response? This father approaches Jesus with the desperation of someone who has tried everything. And then comes the phrase that tears at the soul, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." Mark 9:24. He believes and doubts at the same time. Wait, but fear, loves it, but is exhausted. He represents so many who live this paradox within their faith. Lord, I follow you, but there are days when I no longer know how to pray. Lord, I believe, but sometimes my pain screams louder than my hope. Lord, I know you can. But why hasn't it happened yet? This confusing prayer is one of the most honest in the Bible, and Jesus doesn't reject it. Instead, he responds with power, because sincerity always touches the sky more than performance. This story forces us to confront a very common lie, that doubt separates us from God. But is it really? Or is it precisely in the confession of doubt that we approach each other with authenticity? Because God doesn't look for performative faith. He looks for torn hearts. And here is a revelation that will shake you. The miracle does not require perfect faith, but true faith. Not a faith that pretends not to be afraid, but a faith that, despite the fear, keeps coming to Jesus. It is this fragile, bruised, tired, but alive faith that moves the sky. And if even this father was heard in the midst of his unbelief, why do you think Jesus would ignore his cry? The father's faith was not enough to cast out demons, but it was enough to touch Jesus. Because faith is not a muscle to be shown off, it is a bridge to be crossed even when it seems unstable. And maybe today you are experiencing this crisis. I pray, but nothing seems to change. I believe, but I'm still broken. I read the word, but I feel alone. Jesus reveals to you, he doesn't expect you to have all the answers. He just wants you to not give up looking for him, because even cracked faith can sustain entire miracles. That father didn't know much about doctrine, but he knew where to kneel, and that was enough. The boy's release was radical, instant, definitive. But perhaps the greatest miracle was in that father's heart. He learned that faith doesn't have to be great to be powerful. You just need to be honest. Have you been honest about your faith? Or have you lived a rehearsed, plastered faith that hides the cracks for fear of being judged? Maybe today is the day for you to pray like that father. Help my unbelief. This may be the most spiritual prayer you have ever prayed, because it's when you admit your weakness that Jesus shows your strength. Write in the comments now, with courage and dedication, Jesus, help my unbelief, not as a religious gesture, but as a cry of the soul, like a surrender. And if this message was like a mirror that exposed your tired faith, share it. Because there are people dying in silence with the guilt of not believing as they think they should. And they need to know that even shaky faith has value. And yes, click like as a vulnerable leap of faith, not to show strength, but to say, still, I continue. There's something even more impressive about to be revealed. Because if there is pain in doubt, there is another type of suffering that many hide, God's silence. The silence that hurts more than absence. The silence that feels like abandonment. And the story that follows will confront everything you think about waiting on God. Prepare to be deeply moved. Can there be anything more distressing than God's silence? Then pray, cry, fast, insist, and hear nothing in response? Not a yes, not a no, not even a wait, just silence. And if you've been through this, you know that this silence has a sound. It echoes like abandonment, as if God were too far away to notice you, as if he was too busy with the world to hear your pain. But Jesus reveals it to you. His silence is never empty. It's sacred, loaded on purpose. And when you understand God's silence, you will realize that he never stopped acting. He was just preparing something that words couldn't explain. The story of Lazarus exposes a wound that many hide, frustration with God's timing. Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. They weren't just followers, they were close friends, the kind of friendship that shares meals, laughter, and pain. So, when Lazarus falls ill, the natural thing is to expect Jesus to come immediately. After all, he healed strangers. How could I not run to save a friend? But no, Jesus receives the news and remains where he was for 2 more days. 2 days of silence, 2 days of waiting, 2 days in which the hearts of Martha and Mary were torn apart. And when Jesus finally arrives, Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. The body already smells bad. Hope seems to have been buried with him. And then comes the phrase filled with pain, "Lord, if you were here, my brother would not have died." John 11:21. It's an accusation, a confession, an outburst. And maybe it's the phrase you've already shouted in the silence of your room. If the Lord were here, I wouldn't have gotten divorced, lost my father, failed in this area, sunk in this addiction. But what Jesus answers is surprising. It does not provide a theological justification. He doesn't try to explain himself, he just cries. The Son of God cries. Before the tomb, he allows himself to feel human pain, not because he had doubts about what he would do, but because he doesn't ignore the pain in the process. And this reveals a transformative truth. Jesus may be silent, but he is never indifferent. His silence is not absence, it is wordless presence. He sees, he feels, he cares. And when he cries, he consecrates your pain as something sacred. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Before the tomb, Jesus cries out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" John 11:43. And the dead come back to life. What was buried rises up. What seemed definitive falls apart. And there, before, the eyes that cried, the impossible folds. Because when Jesus speaks, even death has to retreat. And this teaches us something essential. The fact that Jesus took time does not mean that he forgot. His time does not follow our clock, but it follows an eternal purpose. And sometimes, he waits for the smell of death so that no one can say, it was luck, coincidence, or human effort. He expects the impossible to reveal what only he can do. And here's a question that may confront your faith. Is what you call abandonment not, in fact, the preparation of a greater miracle? Is this silence not God setting the stage for something that will mark you forever? Because the biggest mistake many people make is confusing silence with disinterest. But Jesus reveals it to you. While you were waiting for an answer, he was preparing a resurrection. Perhaps today you are crying in front of a grave in your life, a dream that died, a promise that seems forgotten, a prayer that no longer comes out with force. But what you need to remember is that God's clock doesn't tick by anxiety, it ticks by purpose. When Jesus arrives, he arrives with glory. He doesn't come to put a bandage on, he comes to resurrect. And even though it seems late, he never lost control. Therefore, with all the courage you have, write in the comments, even in silence, I trust in you, Jesus. Because this declaration in the middle of waiting is one of the greatest proofs of faith you can give. And if that word tore something inside you, if it brought to the surface a buried pain, share it. Someone needs to hear that God's silence is also love. And yes, click like, as if to say, I still hope. Because this simple gesture can be used by God to touch other silent hearts. But what if I told you that the greatest weight many carry is not pain, but the shame of the past? What if the isolation that consumes you today is the result of a history that you avoid even thinking about? The next story reveals that Jesus doesn't just know your past, he uses it as a bridge to healing. What comes next could be the turning point in your journey. Prepare your heart. The revelation will surprise you. What to do when what hurts you most is what no one can know. When your greatest pain is hidden behind smiles, routines, rehearsed phrases like everything is fine, there are stories that are not told even in prayer. There are scars that hurt more in memory than on the skin. And there is a silence that is born not from the absence of God, but from the fear of being exposed. Shame, blame, rejection, traumas that become walls. And Jesus reveals it to you. What you try to hide is exactly what he wants to heal, because what you hide in fear of being rejected is what he uses to find you. This is exactly what happens in the story of the Samaritan woman. A meeting that seemed accidental, but in the divine plan was an ambush of love. Jesus was traveling and decided to pass through Samaria, something unusual for a Jew. And even more unusual is that he stops at a well in the heat of midday, when no one goes. There, no one, except that woman. She doesn't go in the morning like everyone else because she doesn't want to meet eyes. You don't want fake smiles. You don't want to hear comments. She prefers the scorching sun to the shadow of humiliation, because it carries a past that the entire city knows, a past that makes her invisible during the day and unclean, according to the law. She had 5 husbands, and the man she lived with now wasn't her husband. That woman lived between loneliness and judgment, between people's contempt and the constant reminder of everything that went wrong. And it is there, exactly there, that Jesus decides to find her. But he doesn't start with accusations. It doesn't require explanations. He asks for water, a simple request but one that breaks barriers. And then a dialogue begins that changes everything. Jesus speaks of living water that truly satiates, and when she shows interest, he says, "Go, call your husband," a phrase that seems trivial but that opens up the wound. She responds, "I don't have a husband." And then he reveals, "You said it well. You had 5, and what you have now is not yours." John 4:17-18. What she avoided is exactly what Jesus exposes, but tenderly. No condemnation. And this reveals something profound. Jesus does not reveal our past to shame us. He reveals it to heal. Because what is not confronted is not healed. And what is not cured continues to imprison us. The most surprising thing is that after this encounter, the woman runs into the city and shouts, "Come and see a man who told me everything I have done." John 4:29. What was once a source of shame is now a testimony. What was a reason for isolation now becomes a proclamation. And there, through the woman everyone avoided, an entire city is touched. Because Jesus reveals to you what was the reason for your fall can become the bridge of your mission. How many times have you felt that your past disqualifies you, that the marks he bears nullify any chance of being used by God? But what if I told you that what you were taught about perfection is deeply wrong? God never used perfect people. He used healed people. And healing only begins when there is truth, when there is exposure, when there is delivery. Therefore, the biggest mistake is not making a mistake. It's continuing to hide as if Jesus didn't know, as if he didn't want to restore. Now, stop for a moment and ask yourself, could the loneliness you feel today be the result of the mask you are afraid to take off? Could it be that what isolates you is not people, but the secrets you carry? What if the greatest step of liberation was to stop running from the well and accept the encounter with Jesus? Because there, where no one else wants to go, he is waiting, not to judge you, but to say, "I know everything about you, and yet I choose to love you." And if this word confronts you, write boldly in the comments, "Jesus, even use my past." Yes, comment. Not to expose yourself to others, but to declare before heaven and hell that you will no longer be a slave to shame, that you won't let your past define your future. And if you know someone who lives hidden in guilt, share this video like someone reaching into the well, because that click could be the key to healing for someone who thinks they no longer have value. While many deal with the weight of the past, others carry a guilt that makes them hide even from God. But what if I told you that even when you hide, God still calls you by name? The next block will reveal something that can transform the way you see God's presence, even in your worst moments. Get ready. The next story is not about who was found, but about who tried to hide from the love that never stops looking. There are pains that are unseen, but they shape the way we hide from life. There are wounds that convince us that we cannot be found, not even by God, and perhaps nothing reveals secret loneliness as much as the act of hiding. Not just physically us, but emotionally, spiritually, inwardly. The pain of carrying the guilt and believing that if God really saw, he wouldn't stay. And Jesus reveals it to you. The hiding place of shame is not a safe place. It is a prison disguised as protection. And it is in this emotional cell that Adam and Eve tried to take refuge after the fall. And that, to this day, many of us inhabit without knowing it. The story begins with the beauty of creation. God formed human beings in his image, gave them authority, direct communion with him. But all it took was one choice, an impulsive decision, seduced by the voice of doubt, for everything to collapse. After eating the fruit, Both of their eyes opened, but not as they imagined. What they saw was not glory. It was the shame. And then they sewed sheets to cover the body, and they hid. Yes, they hid from the Creator himself, from the God who came every day at dusk, from the God who knew their names, who created them with love, that he knew them deeply. But that day, he was feared as if he were the accuser. The Bible records one of the most impactful and revealing verses in the entire biblical narrative, Genesis 3:9. But the Lord God called to the man, saying, "Where are you?" Not because he didn't know, but because he wanted Adam to know where he had lost his way. The first sin did not destroy God, but it destroyed man's awareness of who God was. Shame erased intimacy. Guilt took away the heart. And just like Adam, how many people today live behind stitched leaves? Not literal sheets, but emotional masks. Disguises of spirituality. Appearances that hide pain, doubt, lack of meaning. People who even attend churches, but hide when they are broken. Who even pray, but remain silent in the parts that hurt the most. And Jesus reveals it to you. You can hide from the world, but you will never be able to hide from his healing gaze. The pain of loneliness generated by guilt is sneaky. You start out thinking you are protecting yourself, and you end up believing that no one would ever accept you if they knew the truth. That mistake you made, that decision that you hide even from yourself, that which still haunts you like a shadow. You don't hide because you're weak. You hide because you've been hurt, because someone made you believe that only perfect people are lovable. Only the impeccable ones are used. But what if I told you that God never looked for those who are strong, but rather those who let themselves be found? Because the first "Where are you?" of God echoes to this day. Imagine the voice of God walking through the garden, the sound of soft but intentional footsteps. He did not come with fire or thunder. He didn't scream. He called. Because even in error, God did not lose his tenderness. Even in the face of the fall, he still sought reconciliation. And that breaks us. Because Jesus reveals to you that his love doesn't just find us when we're standing up. He finds us when we're on our knees covered in guilt, wanting to disappear. It is there, exactly there, that the sky leans down and asks, "Where are you?" And today I ask you, where are you? Not geographically, but emotionally, spiritually. Have you been hiding? Who have you been running from? What if the pain you feel today is the result of the hiding place you built for fear of being rejected even by God? But what if I told you that this hiding place was never necessary? That what you fear to show is exactly what Jesus already saw and chose to love anyway? Because God's plan for Adam and Eve did not end in shame. He provided clothes himself. He protected them himself. And above all, he began there the promise of redemption. The cross was decided since Eden. The Son would come, and he would defeat the serpent. For where sin abounded, grace abounded all the more. The time has come to stop running away, to let the presence that once caused fear now bring relief, to hear the same divine question with another heart. Where are you? And if you feel like this question was for you, comment now. Jesus, here I am. Find me. Yes, declare. It doesn't matter how long you hide. God's love never gave up looking for you. And if this block touched you, share it. Maybe someone is in deep emotional hiding, and you can be the voice that echoes God's call. Remember, your click could be a cry for rescue to someone who thinks God has abandoned them. But it's not over yet. If shame makes us hide, the emptiness of the soul makes us run after everything except God. The next block will expose an even deeper pain, the existential hole that no success, no applause, no pleasure can fill. What if I told you that this emptiness isn't bad luck? It's an invitation from heaven. You are about to understand why even the wisest, like Solomon, came to an end saying, "All is vanity," and that could change everything. After understanding that shame hides us from God, now it's time to explore an even more camouflaged pain, the one that masquerades as achievement. It's when you achieve everything you were told would bring you meaning, career, stability, respect, maybe even fame, and yet you feel an unbearable emptiness when you go to bed at night. And Jesus reveals it to you. That hole in the soul that doesn't seem to fill itself, even when everything seems to be in place, is not a defect. It's a warning, a spiritual warning that you are seeking eternity in fleeting things. Think of Solomon, a legendary king, wisdom that crossed borders, riches that would put any modern tycoon to shame, political power, armies, gardens, palaces, parties, women, thousands, culture, unparalleled. And yet he writes one of the most disturbing verses in the Bible, Ecclesiastes 1:2. "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "vanity of vanities. All is vanity." This is not the speech of someone frustrated at not having succeeded. It's the outburst of someone who reached the top and discovered that there was nothing there. That success, when God is not the center, becomes just an echo in a tired heart. And you may be exactly in that place. Someone who did everything right, who fought, that won. But now you look around and ask yourself, is that all? The feeling that you are surrounded by everything, except what really matters. You have food, but no appetite. There is a bed, but no rest. There are people around, but there is no real communion. It is filled with activities, but empty of meaning. And maybe even try to silence this pain with new goals, more goals, another trip. But the silence of the soul is not deceived by external noises. Solomon tried to fill what was eternal with what was finite. He himself says, "I have not denied my heart any pleasure." But he ended up with an even emptier soul, because what he needed was no longer. It was what was essential. And that, not even the entire world is capable of offering. How many people today live this cycle of achievements that seem promising, but turn to emotional ashes soon after? They buy, celebrate, post, and that same night, they cry alone in the dark. And Jesus reveals it to you. The emptiness you feel is not weakness. It's a longing for God, missing the origin of meaning, of purpose, of presence. And why does it hurt so much? Because we were taught to believe that success would heal us. That if you could be someone admired, someone recognized, everything would fall into place. But the problem is that you can conquer the entire world and still lose yourself in the process. Solomon had everything he wanted, but it was only when he turned back to God that he understood that the true value of life lies in the fear of the Lord. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of every man. Ecclesiastes 12:13. This phrase might seem too religious by today's standards, but it is the end of the line for those who have followed all the paths and discovered that only one leads to fulfillment. And now I ask you honestly, are you full of things but empty of God? Have you filled your schedule but lost direction? Have you accumulated achievements and yet you feel alone? If this question hurt, it's because it needs to be answered and not responded to with more performance, but with surrender. Because as long as you keep trying to numb the emptiness with more achievements, more applause, more distractions, the further you will be from healing. The cure is not in having more. You are to be found by the one who never left you. This is the truth that no one wants to hear, but it frees them. Not all emptiness is a lack of blessing. Sometimes it is the absence of God. And when we understand this, our prayer changes. It stops being "God give me" and becomes "God fill me." And this is the prayer he loves to answer most, because it is not in much that he reveals himself. It's in brokenness, in the space left by frustrations, in the soul that is tired of pretending that it is okay. Because only when you recognize that you are empty can he be everything in you. If you felt this weight, comment now with faith and courage, "Jesus, fill my void." Write, declare, unmask this silent pain. Don't allow the world to make you believe that you are ungrateful for feeling this way. It's not ingratitude. It is a spiritual cry. And that cry needs to be heard. Share this video with someone who seems to have it all, but you know that inside, they're falling apart. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who needs saving the most. Your sharing can be the breath of God that reaches a collapsing heart. What comes next is even more disconcerting. If the emptiness of achievements is already painful, forgetting in the middle of the journey is devastating. Imagine giving your all, helping someone to climb, and when it's your turn, being forgotten in the dark. The next block will reveal one of the cruelest lonelinesses, that of someone who was left behind by someone who promised to remember. Jose knew this place, and what happened to him will change the way you interpret the silences in life. Prepare your heart, because what comes next is about God's timing. After plunging into the existential void that not even gold can fill, the time comes to face a pain that corrodes slowly and silently, but with a devastating force: oblivion. And it's not just any kind of forgetfulness. It's the one that comes after everything you've done for others. After your delivery, your loyalty, your sacrifice. You give your all, you wait for recognition, you wait for that minimal return, and what you get is silence, indifference, an abandonment that does not scream, but suffocates. And Jesus reveals to you, this loneliness is not a sign of failure. It is the field where God cultivates his faithfulness. Imagine being in prison for a crime you didn't commit, isolated, forgotten, wronged. Jose lived this reality. He had interpreted the dream of Pharaoh's chief cupbearer accurately. He asked for nothing in return, just a simple gesture. Remember me. And even after his release, the butler went on with his life and forgot. The chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but rather forgot him. Genesis 40:23. There are no crueler words than these for those who are already hurt. Being ignored is a pain. Being forgotten is quite another, and often even deeper. Maybe you know this feeling of having been essential to someone at a decisive moment, having reached out, caught the fall, helped with the reconstruction, but when it was you who needed it, silence. No signal, no returns, no thank you. It's as if their pain is no longer useful to them, as if you only had value while you served. And now, in the absence of applause and attention, you feel invisible, unworthy of even remembering. But Jesus reveals it to you. When men forget, God begins to act. Yes, it may seem like everything has stopped, that your life stagnated at that point of abandonment. But in fact, something is being built in the invisible. Because while Joseph was ignored by men, he was remembered by God. Heaven does not need human reminders to fulfill divine promises. And perhaps, like Jose, you are in a period of forgetfulness that is, in fact, preparation. Because when the appointed time arrived, Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret. And then suddenly, the butler remembered. Today I remember my mistakes. Genesis 41:9. 2 years later, not before, not when Jose wanted, but exactly when God needed it. Is your suffering today not God's strategic pause before promotion? Isn't this silence of people, in fact, the stage being set so that only he can be glorified when everything happens? Jose did not leave prison to just be free. He left to rule Egypt. The cupbearer's forgetfulness was painful, but necessary. Because if he remembered before, maybe Joseph would be just another freed servant. But in God's time, he became the key to an entire nation. And you? Are you waiting for recognition from people who were once just bridges and not destiny? Are you paralyzed by an absence that God allowed, precisely to free you from emotional dependence on someone who never had the authority to write your story? Jesus reveals to you, not all forgetfulness is a tragedy. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's the hand of God pulling you away from alliances too fragile to sustain the glory he wants to pour into your life. You need to free yourself from the need to be remembered by those who don't carry your purpose. Heaven does not need a human reference to exalt you. He just needs a faithful heart, willing to trust the process, even when everything seems at a standstill. Because God's timing may seem slow, but it is never wrong. And when he acts, no one holds back. Nobody stops it. Nobody gets confused, because the memory of heaven never fails. And when the time comes to lift you up, all those who have forgotten you will be surprised at what God will do with you. If this word touched you, if this is your silent pain, comment now with faith and courage. Jesus, I trust in your time. Declare it, not like someone repeating a phrase, but like someone who decides to let go of control and hand over the clock of their soul into his hand. Write and share with someone who is feeling forgotten. Maybe that person is one step away from giving up. and your gesture is the reminder they so desperately need. Now close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and imagine the silence. But not the silence of absence, a sacred silence, a silence that precedes something big. Because what comes next will touch an even more sensitive point, the feeling of not being enough. Yes, even when we try our best, we still often sink. But what if I told you that this sinking is also part of the plan? Get ready, because Peter's story will show you that even when we lose our ground, Jesus still holds our hand. After the pain of being forgotten by those who should have remembered, we now face an even more intimate wound, the feeling of not being enough, a feeling that hides behind the smiles, the efforts, the forced everything is fine. You try, you pray, you do what you can, but deep down, there is that cruel echo. You failed, and this voice does not come from outside. It is born from within, of your own fears, from your own traumas, the times you tried to walk on water and sank. And Jesus reveals to you, it is not the strength that sustains you, it is the hand that lifts you up. Peter knew Jesus. He walked with him. He saw miracles. He was called to live the impossible. And even then, he doubted. Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. Matthew 14:28. And Jesus replied, come. And he went. He dared. He trusted. But all it took was for the wind to get strong for fear to enter. His step faltered, his heart trembled, and Pedro began to sink. The text says, but when he felt the strong wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Matthew 14:30. He sank, but he didn't drown, because before the water swallowed him, the hand reached him. How many times have you felt this way? You even tried to obey the call. You took a risk, trusted. He let go of the safety of the boat, but life surprised you with headwinds. Anxiety grew, insecurity paralyzed you, and suddenly you were sinking into thoughts of guilt, shame, failure, and worst of all, believing that God abandoned you because of it. But Jesus reveals it to you. The miracle wasn't Peter walking. It was Jesus not letting him sink. There are people who think that failure is proof of spiritual weakness, that if you were afraid, it is because your faith is not enough. But what if I told you that the faith that Jesus honors is not the one that never wavers, but the one that even when wavering still cries out, Lord, save me? The faith that continues even after stumbling. The faith that recognizes, alone I can't do it, but with you I can try again. The faith that, even soaked in insecurity, still looks up, waiting for an outstretched hand. And that hand always comes. Maybe you are living in this exact moment. You tried to follow Jesus. He did what was right, let go of what hurt you. It broke cycles. He took steps of faith. But now, you're wallowing in doubt. Life became rough seas. Fear has arrived, and you feel like you failed. But Jesus reveals to you, it is not your performance that keeps you standing. It is His grace, the same grace that does not abandon you when you sink, but jumps into the water to rescue you. There is a toxic theology that says that anyone who fails in faith is weak. But is it really? Or is this narrative stopping injured people from crying out for help? Could it be that many times the fear we feel is not of failure itself, but of the judgment of those who never dared to leave the boat? Those who never had Pedro's courage are usually the ones who point the finger the most when someone sinks. But only Jesus can say, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Matthew 14:31. And yet, He saved him. You don't need to fake strength where there is tiredness, nor hide your flaws behind religious masks. Jesus does not expect perfection. He expects truth. Wait for your cry. Expect to hear, "Lord, save me," because it is in this humble, desperate, and sincere request that He reveals the power of His mercy. He doesn't just reach out to the saints. He reaches out to those who are sinking. And maybe that's precisely where your faith really begins. So today, if you feel like you are sinking, cry out, now, just the way you are, with the thoughts you carry, with the doubts that suffocate you, with a soul tired of trying to be enough. Because the good news of the gospel isn't that you need to be strong, it's that you have a Savior, and He doesn't let His people get lost in the sea of guilt. If this word reached you, if you are in this struggle, comment now with faith and without fear of judgment. Jesus, even though I am sinking, I cry out to you. State this in the comments. Not out of religiosity, but as an act of emotional and spiritual courage. Assume your vulnerability before the one who knows you inside. And if you know someone who is sinking emotionally, spiritually, or psychologically, send them this video. It could be the hand that God will use to save you. And here's something that few realize in this story. Peter only walked back to the boat because Jesus held him there. In other words, even after the fall, there was still solid ground. There was still purpose. There was still forgiveness. So don't give up, because what comes now is even more surprising. What if I told you that even Paul, the apostle of apostles, was also unable to carry everything alone, that he also cried out 3 times, asking God to take away the pain, and Jesus' response was different. Get ready, because what will be revealed in the last block could change the way you understand pain forever. What if everything you faced so far was preparing you for the most liberating moment of your journey? After so many falls, attempts, silences, and invisible weights, there is a question that echoes in the soul. How long will I have to continue being strong? How long will I have to pretend I'm fine while I'm falling apart inside? Jesus reveals to you, your strength was never what sustained your life. It was His grace. And the truth that Paul discovered at the height of his pain could be the same one that sets you free today. Paul was not just any man. He was an apostle, evangelist, teacher, missionary. He knew the scriptures. He heard directly from the resurrected Christ. He performed signs. But even so, there was a thorn, a torment, a chronic pain, something that, even in his deep spirituality, he could not remove. And he cried out. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. 3 intense, passionate, desperate requests. 3 times he said, Lord, take this away from me. And the answer from heaven came like a shock. My grace is sufficient for you. 2 Corinthians 12:9. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't the cure. It was something even deeper. It was a revelation. Have you ever wondered why God doesn't take away certain pains? Why does He, who has all power, sometimes choose not to remove what hurts us most? Paul might think, has God forgotten me? Is my faith not enough? But Jesus reveals it to you. There are pains that remain not because God is absent, but because He wants to show you where true strength lives. He wants to deconstruct this cultural and even religious lie that says you need to be unbeatable at all times. Because this emotional armor you carry isn't protecting you, it's killing you inside. Paul heard something from the mouth of Jesus that revolutionized everything. For my power is made perfect in weakness, not in performance, not perfectly, not in the appearance that everything is okay, but in vulnerability, in exposed pain, actually confessed, and that's where you also need to get to today. How many times have you looked in the mirror and charged yourself more than God would charge you? How many times have you thought that being a Christian meant being unshakable, without crisis, without doubt, without fear? But that's not faith. That's pride disguised as holiness. Real faith is when, even weakly, you say, Lord, I continue to believe. The loneliness of carrying the expectation of being strong is one of the greatest spiritual prisons today. And the truth is that no one can be strong all the time. Nobody, not even Paul. And that is precisely where the miracle lies. Because when you accept that you are weak, when you stop hiding that you are tired, when you stop trying to keep up appearances, Jesus comes in. And He doesn't come in to judge you, He comes in to support you, to be your rock, your base, your shelter. He meets you at your limit and whispers, you no longer need to fake strength, because now my grace will be enough. Paul did not become less of an apostle because he had a thorn. On the contrary, it was there that he discovered his true authority. Because whoever carries visible wounds but continues to love, serve, preach, forgive, This one knows the strength that comes from God. The thorn does not disqualify you. It humanizes you. It brings you closer to people. It makes you more sensitive, more compassionate, more true. And that's why Jesus didn't remove it, because instead of healing the pain, he chose to use it as a platform for glory. Can you understand what this means? Do you have the courage to declare, I am not weak because I have pain. I am strong because even with it, I am still standing. Can you free yourself from this need to appear invincible today? Because the strength that is displayed is fleeting, but the strength that comes from redeemed weakness is eternal. Comment now with sincerity and faith. Jesus, your grace is sufficient for me. But don't write on impulse. Write if this message really ripped something apart in you. Write if you're tired of trying to handle everything alone. Write if you want to exchange your burden for rest. Because that comment can be more than words. It can be a step of faith. It could be the beginning of healing. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, who needs to understand that they no longer need to pretend to be strong, send them this video. Sharing is also an act of compassion. Jesus reveals to you now that your pain was never useless, that even your thorn is part of an eternal purpose, that what you thought was stopping you is precisely what prepares you, and when everything in you wants to give up, there will be an invisible hand lifting you up and saying, I never asked for your strength, I offered mine. And even without continuing to another block, the impact doesn't end here, because this message needs to continue resonating within you. May each word echo until your soul finally understands. You are not alone, never was, because there is a God who knows your silence and yet calls your name with love. If you've come this far, it's because something in you couldn't bear to live in this internal silence, in this invisible place where the soul screams, but no one hears. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, you felt like someone really saw you. It wasn't a video production. It wasn't a well-constructed narrative. It was the Holy Spirit crossing you through human words, touching wounds that you tried to hide even from yourself. Jesus reveals to you that it is not the absence of pain that marks your liberation, but the exact moment in which you stop pretending that it doesn't hurt and start letting him enter that hidden place. This video was not just a reflection. It was a confrontation with the truth, a divine revelation, a liberation in progress. You saw that even the giants of faith cried, that even the prophets hid, that even the Savior sweated blood in a dark garden of anguish. And yet, none of them were left alone, and you won't stay either. Because now you know that you no longer need to carry everything alone, nor maintain the appearance of strength when your heart cries for help. God didn't call you to performance, He called you to presence. And He is here, now, right now. And if something inside you is shaking, crying, or just silent, know it is the Spirit testifying that this word was for you. And that's why you stayed until the end, because the sky was waiting for you to open up for this moment. And before we continue, I want to invite you to pray with me. But it's not just any prayer. It is a cry of the soul, a surrender, a sincere delivery of someone who is exhausted from trying and finally accepts that only grace is enough. So, take a deep breath, close your eyes if you can, and just say with your heart, Jesus, enter this place where no one enters. I don't want to carry this loneliness anymore. I don't want to be a prisoner of my own strength anymore. Free me from the burden of appearing strong. Heal me from the fear of being seen as weak. Show me that your grace is enough, even when everything in me wants to stop. I surrender my pains, my masks, my silences, and I receive your love. I receive your presence. I receive your healing. I receive your grace. In the name of Jesus, amen. If you truly prayed this, it wasn't just a prayer. It was a spiritual realignment. It was a new cycle starting. And the good news is, this isn't over yet, because what comes now may be exactly what God wants to reveal as a continuation of this healing that has already begun in you. The video that is now appearing on your screen is more than content. It is an extension of that liberation. It's the part that will show you what to do with everything you felt here. Do not ignore this. Call. Don't leave it for later. What you will discover in this next video could be what you need to leave this emotional prison for good and experience the full freedom that Jesus has already achieved for you. Click now and continue this process. It needs see what God will show you. And if this message spoke to you on levels that words cannot explain, comment here now. I made it to the end. Write this as an act of faith, of courage, of testimony. Because every comment like that is a sign that you are not alone, that there is a community growing here of broken people, yes, but in restoration. Share this video with someone you know is struggling in silence. Be an instrument of healing in someone else's life, and subscribe to the channel now. But not just as someone who follows content, but as someone who makes a commitment to their healing journey. Your clicking subscribe is a declaration that you are willing to continue walking towards freedom. And to seal this moment with spiritual authority, receive this word as God's seal on your life. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. You have been seen, you have been touched, and now you are being restored. Jesus reveals to you that your journey does not end here. She's just getting started.